Coogs House. It was a big week for the NCAA, but where does Houston fit in?
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, and whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Appreciate you making us your first listen each and every day. If you want to join the conversation but don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below. When you split an Oreo, what side of the Oreo do you take first? We know you take both, but what side do you take first? Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. More on that later. But it was a big week in college sports from a legislation perspective. For instance, in the third segment, we're talking about how national letters of intent are about to go away. They're just not going to exist anymore. The House settlement hit another milestone this week. That'll be segment 2. But segment 1 is that a new Ross Dellinger article drops some insights into a potential super league. This has kind of been rumored and hinted at a lot in the course of the last 2 years of college sports realignment. Seems like, feels like, looks like, sounds like there's a lot of real feet moving, feet on the ground kind of stuff with this potential super league. And so I want to talk a little bit about what Project Rudy is and what Dellinger's talking about here. So, and then I want to obviously talk about how each of these things ties to Houston at the end of their respective segments. Project Rudy is led by some high-profile ADs, is what Dellinger says. He doesn't say SEC schools, Big Ten schools, anything, but he says high-profile ADs, and has been shown to another 25 or more ADs at this point in time. He said by name, Notre Dame's AD Swarbeck, Coach Swarbeck, he's apparently also in at least seen it, and it's important because Notre Dame as an independent but a high dollar program would be kind of a unique non-conference outlier in this situation, right? It involves Disney money, worldwide leader in sports money. ESPN's a part of Disney, right? And then a private equity group called Blackstone. You've heard my 2 cents about private equity in the past. I am cautious about getting involved with private equity groups from a macro level kind of thing. But Project Rudy involves working with Blackstone. The goal would be to have a 70-ish team league, Power 4 schools plus Notre Dame. Yes, that includes Houston, and that's a big win. Within that, there would be a gigantic league with tiers of payouts within it, and they'd only play one another. This means no more FCS or Group of 5 competition. This is all football, I should stress, but no more FCS or Group of 5 competition. All power conference football. And the goal with that is they're looking at, I should say, how a team will have 1 or 2 power conference games in their non-conference slate, and those will be by leaps and bounds the biggest revenue earners in their non-conference opponents, right? Whether it's a neutral field or whatever, right? They're the biggest games, right? The same way Houston went to Oklahoma this year, right? That was a bigger game for Oklahoma than when they play, Tulane. Even though Tulane is really good right now, right? It's a bigger game for them in terms of dollars and draw, TV time, and so on, than a Tulane is typically, or than your average Group of 5 school is for sure. And so the thought is, in eliminating those games, you'd be making this league with a lot more value all of a sudden, right? Only power conference games. That within the league, you'd be incentivized to win games because within these 70 schools, there'd be 3 different tiers with promotion, relegation, standards, right? Standards sounds like are kind of up in the air at this point, how you move up and down, how big the tiers are, etc. But the lowest tier, the smallest tier, will be making at the beginning of this theoretical move as much or more money as a Big 12 payout would be typically from TV revenue. And then that number would go up over time. It would also go up if you went to tier 2 or tier 1. Tier 1 schools in the 70 school program would be making payouts between 130 and 250 million dollars a year just for being in the league, right? So your incentive to move up is you can quadruple your earnings, right? And moving up to the top tier. There have been, I guess, at some level, this sounds like from Dellinger, a proposal where there are some like permanent tier 1 members or whatever, kind of like if you think like the UN has like the 5 like veto power kind of place, like the same kind of like powerful like founder or whatever. He didn't act like in his writing that that's gained much steam. Obviously, those 8 schools would want it and everyone else would not. But I do think it's worth pointing out that that is like twice as tier 1 would be like twice as much money as an SEC school gets presently from their TV dollar payout. We're talking about a lot of money, right? The thought on the starting point of this, they're really like pitching it to the ADs and all these different, it's apparently like some like elaborate glorified PowerPoint presentation. Looking at starting this sometime in the early 2030s, because you're going to have all of these different conferences kind of reaching their end of TV contracts around then. Again, good to be in the Big 12. And let's go and transition how this impacts Houston with that, because the Big 12 is on the early side of when that all ends, right? And so the deal for Houston is that they're kind of in a great spot because of when the Big 12 TV deal ends versus when the ACCs will, right? If we can assume, or we should assume, that the Big 10 and the SEC would be in this deal, right? And they're going to theoretically try and get 4 power conferences. Who knows what happens with this makeshift Pac-12 or whatever, right? But the Big 12 of those next tier of conferences, the Big 12, the ACC's close there, right? And then who knows what happens with this Pac-12. The Big 12 be finishing their TV revenue deal first. And so they would be all 16 schools, or however many are in the conference by then, are eligible to sign over to this. And this is, if it were to go through, from a purely financial perspective, the feature that Houston would have to opt into, right? More revenue. The minimum revenue you're looking at is, frankly, because of the slow growth into the league, it's more than they're making right now, right? And so it almost makes too much sense for this proposed Super League to be an automatic yes from a Houston. Further, from a fan's perspective, and the thing I like about it as a fan, and this podcast is not hiding the fact that it's more fanism than journalism half the time. But what I appreciate about this league as a fan is there's not all, it's even in that it's no school is playing these FCS gimme buyout games or whatever. And it also means I don't have to watch those, right? So I don't feel the, incentive to play them. Like, oh man, I really wish we had some of those like kind of gimme wins. Like we go play Southwest A&M State or whatever, right? Instead, right, I'm not playing those teams because I don't want to watch them play Houston, and I don't feel like my team is missing out on an easy win or a healthy week or whatever that other schools would get because they don't play in them either, right? It also means you're, probably going to get back into some sort of a regionality deal out of it, right? It's a giant 70 school coast to coast kind of conference. And so theoretically, this league would be completely separate from the NCAA, but also like from a regionality perspective, if it's about making money, once you've got the full league coast to coast, the money making games are your local rivals too, right? Because those are the games that sell out. And so you start to see some of those things rekindled. And And I think that that's a big part of why Houston joined the Big 12 in the first place, right? Is it gets playing these high-end opponents in Texas and the Texas area, right? And so I really think it is a easy choice for Houston if it were to come up in the early 2030s. That would be, I believe, I think a Nunez call. Even, I mean, I'm assuming he does a good job and gets more than one contract, obviously, but I kind of think this kind of conversation might happen before his present contract is over. So eye on that. But that's the Dellinger piece on the Super League and what that could mean for Houston. Now, there was a large house settlement this week, or large movement in the house settlement this week, which is intentionally timed, I feel like. But before we get to the house settlement, I want to talk to you a little bit about Game Time. Now, Game Time is the best place to get last minute tickets for the lowest price guaranteed. I love Game Time. It's one of the sponsors we actually have that I work with and I enjoy using for my tickets because they have all kinds of cool options where you can like toggle the price and have no surprises. I hate surprises of all kinds, really. But no surprise pricing or anything like that. You can do toggle it to where you see all in pricing. You can see what it looks like for your common shows, your theater. It's a bye week this week. So whatever you're doing this weekend, you get a ticket to it. Sports games, obviously. But you can get the ticket on Game Time and see in that venue for that type of event, in that section and row, what it's going to look like from that seat. And that can help out a lot for certain obstructions or whatever based on what you're trying to go see. So you never get surprised by that either. Game Time has the lowest price guarantee. They can credit you 110% of the difference if you find tickets in the same section and row for cheaper somewhere else. So you're getting the best deal. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply again. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Parker Ainsworth, Locked On Cougs here. Talking about the week that was thus far in the NCAA. Kind of a lot of news came out this week, and we're trying to tie it all back to the Houston Cougars each and every time. So the other big piece of news this week was not just talking about a theoretical Super League, but also talking some about the House settlement. Now, you remember that House versus NCAA is the large Supreme Court, or large case, I should say, being ruled upon, in which you're looking at like what payouts to athletes will be like. Now, this stems from former athletes suing the NCAA, saying that they deserve some money for their name, image, and likeness. There's also aspects of this that are going to lead to direct school-to-athlete pay because these schools are making money on the names, images, and likeness as well. And that's a big part of this. But I would stress that on Monday, we hit a big, big step in this. Got the preliminary approval for the House settlement deal. I mean, schools can start operating under like the assumption that this should pass. Now, it has not officially passed yet, so that's why it's not formalized, but schools need to start getting their ducks in a row as if it were to pass. The deal is $2.8 billion with a B dollars in back pay damages to athletes for having their names, images, and likenesses used, right? And moving forward, this is the spot that hits present tense college football programs. But moving forward, you'd have about 22 million, just under $22 million in a salary cap across sports. Now, as Title IX money, that would also be money split across men's and women's sports. And you're looking at, honestly, a salary cap league across all of sports. What's ironic is that there are some college football programs that if you were to split that 22 and a half, let's just call it 11 for easy math, that there are some programs spending 11 million or more dollars a year on the program through NIL money right now. And so this is not going to necessarily take away from that pot either, although I'll get more to NIL in a second with this. What it's striving to do is have the money come from the school. And that's dramatically different. It's going to fit in everyone's athletic budget a lot differently. And we've talked about on Locked On Coogs before, but there's like less than a dozen college athletic programs that make money in a given year. Not that revenue high amounts. Obviously, that's a lot of programs. But when I'm talking about making money, I mean making a profit, meaning that they can find $22 million in the books presently. And even those ones that make a profit are not necessarily making $20 million in profit, right? This is going to be like a lot of budgeting for a lot of different schools. And bluntly, stuff's going to get cut. I don't know what it is yet, but stuff's going to get cut because they have to find $22 million a year from the school's budget, right? Now, how this ties into NIL for those handful of schools are spending more than $11 million on their football program. And there's not many, but there are some, right? And frankly, as we build up Houston's hoping to get as big and bad as anybody, right? Bad like bad to the bone bad, I should say. The settlement, though, the House settlement has provisions in it where new power would be handed to the NCAA to restrict potential NIL deals. All NIL deals with a booster or collective where the athlete receives over $600 would have to, technically now in this House settlement, go through the NCAA's office. Now, theoretically, the goal of this for the NCAA is kind of trying to keep people from circumventing the salary cap, right? Takes out pay for play kind of options. The NCAA could investigate to make sure that deals are being met and kept. And those deals can be as simple as, hey, you're going to be posting on Instagram once a day for us saying that you, in your story, that you use our socks or whatever, right? That's marketing. That's real deal. That's money. Fine, whatever, right? But the goal of this would be instead of like kind of limiting pay for play, where hey, you're on the team, you get 100 grand here, right? That would be what the NCAA is trying to take out of this, take that away from NILs and collectives, and make those more true sponsorship kind of things, right? The same way the big deal this week was Juju Watkins, the USC women's basketball player, signed some large deal to wear Nike shoes, right? She coincidentally goes to USC as a Nike school, right? But that would be she's wearing Nike shoes through Nike, right? And so it's a sponsorship, not unlike pro sports would be at that point. For Houston, the way this plays out to me is honestly, weirdly, a positive. Hear me out here. Houston is going to have to scramble to find the 22 million like everyone else. And we've heard it before. You've heard it before. Houston's one of the lowest budgets, the lowest of any Power Four school. I believe it was last year, but I would assume it has been every year before that too, right? It just hasn't had the growth because of being locked out of the Big 12 in the 90s, and we can go on and on down the soapbox. But that's where we are today, right? This sets a clear-cut number, 22 million, and it theoretically means everyone's playing by those rules. Right now, can NIL collectives add money to that? Yes. But the NCAA is going to have a hand in that and making sure those are actual NIL deals. And suddenly, it's not that Star Pizza and the folks that do stuff with NIL in the University of Houston do great work. The commercials are funny, kids get paid. It's good stuff, good NIL deals, right? Last year, Jamal Shead had a bunch of NIL deals, right? And frankly, shouts to Landon Gosling for pulling those off. What this is doing, though, is making sure that those NIL deals are true NIL deals. And I don't mean to spill too much tea here. Most of Houston's have been that, right? That's fit. Houston's deals with, unless there's something I have not seen or not heard of, or Houston's deals all check the right boxes for that. They'd be signed off on by the NCAA. It'd be mostly about finding that 22 million, right, from the school side. That's going to be challenging. That's going to be challenging for a lot of people. And with that being challenging for a lot of people, and Houston's NIL kind of already functionally fitting into this, I actually think that this pulls more people, those big spending blue blood power programs, closer to what Houston's doing, as opposed to creating the gap that continues to grow between Houston and those schools in terms of funding. Now, I will also say that one possible outcome of this is it fast forwards the whole switch to the Super League we just talked about in the first segment. But I also think that's a good thing for Houston because Houston, as a member of the Big 12, is not getting left out of that either. And that's more money in the pockets, too. I'm not saying that this house settlement's a good thing in a moral sense or a virtuistic sense or a signal the bat signal, let's go talk to Batman about it sense. But I am saying that in terms of how Houston relates to its athletic peers, I think it works out. And it's not the only big change happening that we're certain of. In fact, there's one that we're much more certain of that it's a little closer to home. I'll talk about that one in the third segment, but first, it's the fall. That means it's time to have fun with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because when you get a hunch in the middle of a football game on a Sunday, you can, just want to know what the stats are, what things look like. You can check in on stats, view the latest play-by-play, and so much more on the same page that you place your bets. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. You get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Parker Ainsworth, Locked on Cougs here, talking about the latest news in the NCAA this week and how those news stories tie to the University of Houston specifically. Now, the biggest piece of news, I think, from a headline grabbing perspective, was that on Wednesday, the NCAA formally announced that they are going to be getting rid of national letters of intent. Now, I think this is tied in large part to the House settlement, right? If we're being honest, the House settlement is going to change a lot about how people are compensated and what they receive and what the formal paperwork looks like. It's going to be more contract based. Functionally, I don't think this is going to change a whole lot. What you're going to have is different types of paperwork being signed. Kids are going to sign a contract and scholarship agreements instead of a national letter of intent, right? But it's still going to be an agreement to go to a school. A national letter of intent was a 1-year scholarship offer, right? That you signed theoretically 4 if you got a redshirt 5 times, right? I don't see the scholarship agreement being any different. It's going to be tied to a little bit different contract. So functionally, I think this is a lot of the same. And I feel like there's some aspect of grabbing headlines about how much the world is changing with this whole thing, right? The national letter of intent has been around for 60 years. I think in the article it said it had been around since 1964. 60 years. And for what it's worth, the people advocating to get rid of it with the House settlement coming is the College Commissioners Association, like the people on the inside, right? And so I think that this is in part because the consequences for breaking a national letter of intent have softened a lot. It used to be that you have to set out at least a semester, if not a year, if you got out of your NLI for reasons outside of a handful of fairly large catastrophic things, right? Now it's more or less like as long as both schools agree and no one pushes charges, you're just going to keep it moving, right? And no one has necessarily I think there was some deal with Mikey Williams initially, but then the legal trouble came and everyone kept put their hands up, and now he's in Central Florida, right? How this will impact Houston is that much like I think it's a lot of malarkey for a lot of the NCAA, this just means that different contracts are getting signed. I don't think it's going to hit Houston at all because I don't think it's going to hit anyone at all. I think there's a lot of faux outrage around this, we're getting rid of scholarship letters when you're just changing what the letter is. I don't mean to talk bad about kids I've coached or worked with because I would never do that. But I have been lucky enough to see a lot of kids sign their national letter of intent to go play at Division I colleges. Not a Houston Cougar yet, but we're working on it. And what I will say is I can count on one hand how many times a kid has signed that letter and read every word of it, because it doesn't happen. The kids are signing on to go to the schools. The agreements are more or less all verbal. It, it's just a formalized document. And while what the document is tied to is going to somewhat shift and change, the meaning behind it is still you have a 1-year deal with the school, and you re-up that again theoretically 4 times, 5 if you get a red shirt. Functionally, this is not different, and I could try and draw connections about why they're making this out to be different, or why the headlines are that the national letter of intent is going away, or whatever, and what the outrage would be stirring, or what have you. But instead of doing all that, I'm just going to tell you not to worry about it, because it's not going to change anything. Athletes that are going to sign up to go to the University of Houston are going to sign whatever paper you put in front of them to go to the University of Houston. I don't care if it's got a yellow Labrador picture across it, or a cougar paw, or I don't know, if it's a piece of wood from Fertitta Center. They're going to sign it if you say you now get a scholarship to go play basketball at Houston with this. They just are. That's just going to change what the formal agreement where it goes. And I think it's a little ridiculous. But if you think I'm ridiculous, think I'm being silly, think there's more to it than all of that, you can feel free to find me at Painsworth 512, PAINSWORTH 512 on Twitter, X, Instagram. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on a handful of other things too. I don't check those quite as frequently. But I'll talk to you about whatever you'd like to on those. Locked On Coogs is prime of the Locked On Podcast Network. Appreciate you making this your first listen of the day. For a second listen, I'm going to recommend Locked On Big 12. Drake Toll's doing a great job breaking down the weekend's games. Houston's on a bye. If you don't know what's going on around the rest of the conference, go check out that one as well. Locked On Coogs is primary Locked On Podcast Network is your team every day. Go Cougs.